This session is about scale, and I want to mainly restrict my comments to my own experiences and insights that I have had. I have had the fortune of working with Michael Dell, Steve Jobs, and John Chambers. Yes, you heard Steve Jobs right. Actually, if you come to my home office, you will see a poster that says, Vivek couldn't have done without you, signed Steve Jobs. So, yes, I have worked with the God of design. If you look at it, Michael Dell took, you are Samidha?
Yes, I am.
All right.
I was not told that this is already started. I'm really sorry.
No problem.
How are you?
Hi.
Share?
Hi.
Hi.
I see you've taken my gig.
No, we're just continuing. So Michael Dell, for example, took the company from zero to $50 billion, now $100 billion, single-handedly. Steve Jobs took the company from zero to now $200 billion plus company. And then you see, John Chambers joined Cisco when the revenue was few $1 million, and he took it to $50 billion. Amazing examples of scale. So I'll tell you, I asked Michael when I worked for him, and I said, Michael, how did you change your mindset? When you started a company, you were worried about dollars. Then the decision became $10, then $100, then $1,000, then $100,000, then $1 million, and then $1 billion. It is not a joke to actually do this. So Michael's answer was equally interesting. He said three things, Vivek. One, when I started, I wanted to start a very large company. I did not start this company to make money or anything like that. That was not the driver. I wanted to do a very large company, and so my focus was that. So my vision was to create a global company with billions of dollars. From day one, I didn't know how to connect the dots, but I knew where to go from there. Number two, I hired people who were better than me and more experienced than me. Even though I was a kid, I mean, Dell started from a dorm. I hired people who were better than me, and this is a very important lesson for all startup people. Don't be afraid to hire people who are more experienced and better than you. And the third thing is, I surrounded myself with people as mentors or my management who have been there, done that before. And rest is history. Right? So that is Michael Dell's response. If I ask the same question to Steve Jobs, I didn't, but his response, I can tell you, his response will be, you want to scale, you design a product that everyone wants to have. That becomes aspiration for everyone to have. You still see Apple new phone release and you see 2-kilometer line in San Francisco even today. So his answer will be very different than Michael Dell, but that is the answer he will give. So these are the two things. I'll stop here because Samidha wants to say something. I'll come back and give you more examples about my experiences and insights.
Hi, sorry, I think I was a little late to this, but I don't know if what exactly we've begun with, but I came here thinking of this topic and how it's kind of evolved over the years for Indian startups scaling, and the little discussion I had with the panelists before we sort of met today was, in the context of whatever is happening in the US and generally with a lot of hyper-scaled companies, that puts a lot of things in perspective. And I think I wanted to really get everyone to talk a little about how things have changed as far as scaling goes. And I was actually meeting Deep, from SoftBank, and we had a discussion on how scaling and growing fast at any cost, that's really something that everyone is now saying, no, that's not the only way to grow. And I want to get Nishant on this. You had a few thoughts. If you can come in and sort of give a perspective on how that's kind of changing.
Yeah, so actually, as I was thinking about intros, Vivek said, he met with Steve Jobs, or he got to hang out. I just hung on to my jobs. That's my introduction there. So I think it's a really poignant time, I guess, in having this discussion around scale, because I do believe, and I share that the same belief that. Like this grow at all costs is not something that is the right formula of success. I'm one of the maybe believers of unit economics. I think what's changing is just a back to basics. Actually, thankfully, I think we've made it much more complex than it needs to be. I think at the end of the day, you're running a business. You owe it to your employees, you owe it to your shareholders, you owe it to your customers to deliver value, and that's what running a company should be, rather than chasing vanity metrics. I think there's many models. So maybe the first sort of clarification point that I'd throw out there is just figure out your formula of scale. There is no one formula. I think the scale formula has become valuation increase, transaction increase, and if you're doubling year on year, then you're a scale company. I think there's many different paths to scale. Like if you look at even my background, you think about LinkedIn scale, from a consumer internet standpoint, for almost 7-8 years of the company's life. They started in 2003. In 2010 was when we were starting to enter sort of scale, not even blitz scale that happened after that. So it took 7 years of building something that's valuable to members and companies before scaling started. You take Freshtest, the other example, and I'd like to throw out a congratulations to Girish on the latest round. Super proud to see an Indian company going out and scaling and planting our flag in Silicon Valley. It is official as of 6 hours ago, yes. So his formula again for scale was different. He's exploiting the fact that you can reach SMBs anywhere. If you have a great product that's really intuitive and easy to use, people will come to you themselves through, whether there's a little bit of marketing, but it's also, a ton of just great product and product referrals. That's his formula of scale, and he's scaled a lot of the sales teams from India, very counterintuitive to the classic field sales approach. There's other enterprise companies that are in my portfolio right now, which are very classically enterprise companies. And again, they're scaling by just growing some clients to be massive clients. So I think the most important thing you can do for yourself is just figure out what game you're playing, and make sure that the scale metrics or the measures of success make sense in the context of that. So I think that's one, but I'll let others share thoughts.
Priya, and I think you can just talk about how I feel, at least in all my years of covering this space, India specifically is very reliant on funding. And I think the whole funding game works on growth, right? And this is, again, something a lot of people are now talking about. Go back to basics, go back to your main business. If you are ride hailing, don't get into 5 other things. Go back to basics. I think that's something, again, a lot of people are talking about. How much does funding contribute to you sort of going in 5 different directions, trying to keep the growth on? And you sort of get trapped in that whole cycle of fundraising and then going back to kind of, just keeping your valuation game up.
Totally. I mean, I'll start with a bit of an intro about me. I'm Priya Rajan. I'm market lead for India, Southeast Asia, and Africa for Silicon Valley Bank. My role specifically for India is working with companies and funds coming out of these regions, looking into the global markets. So kind of my perspective when we were having this discussion is, you have an operator turned investor here, you have a serial investor there, versus my perspective is I sit kind of in the middle. We get to see who gets funded and we get to see who funds them. So, and we've been doing this for 35 years. So we get to see a ton of data on what scaled and worked, what scaled and failed. So a lot of the stories is what scaled and failed. So Samidha, the point you were talking about is what we see on kind of the trend lines. I know I wanted to again throw a congratulations to Girish, because we spoke, Girish has been our client since day -1. His story is so unique, right? He just moved to US just a month ago, and you can see this, the scale that he's already done in a traditional B2B's enterprise kind of a market. Typically, the founders move almost immediately after their, third customer in US. And that is opposite of what Girish followed. So what I'm trying to say is, each of them follow their own story. I don't think a dollar determines your investable, capitalized dollar and determines where you move or how distracted you become. End of the day, it's the owners and the founder, and I would even say your investor, to kind of come up with a strategy together. And I would echo both the sentiment that, my colleague said here, saying that end of the day, you need to have a product market, but also a business model kind of a fit. And think about what you want to do, not just now, but also 5 years down the lane. Kind of stick to it. Don't get distracted just because, your traction is picking up a really high scale somewhere. Some founders go on a high and then kind of go with that and then fail. And some of the stories are in the news right now, just on that scale, they were not ready for that scale.
Add one piece here. So I think you mentioned sort of diversifying, right? Should you diversify your attention? And I think maybe one other thing that will be helpful is just redefine what scale is.
Yeah.
So people kind of enter scale as in, okay, I got a round of funding and so now I have to scale. Right. In my mind, there's very, very defined phases of a company, right? There's an ideation, there's nothing but a piece of paper that you have. You then get to a POC phase where, okay, something is in there, it's kind of making sense, I'm getting something. Then you get your first customer, you make your first customer successful. You actually only get to product market fit. I was just telling someone else this, we were talking about it with another entrepreneur. My definition of product market fit is your product is there, people are willing to pay you for it, so multiple people, and it has been sold not by the founder, but predictably by a couple of others. That's when you know you have product market fit. And now as you get that going and you see, okay, my sales motions are going, I'm seeming to get better returns and so on, then you enter scale. So at these early phases of POC and you can be experimenting. So you can be diversifying your attention because you don't know what's going to work. When you start getting into your product market fit, that's when you really need to focus very, very deeply, get something working, show the traction is going, you can see it in the metrics. And then, at some stage, once you've got some reasonable scale on one, like with Freshdesk was our product that got there, we make the first 20 million on Freshdesk, and then we said, okay, now let's go after multiple products. So again, you can diversify your attention. So I think it's not just don't get distracted, it's at what stage this comes in.
Vivek, you can come in and talk a bit about the role of the investor when it comes to, we hear a lot of times entrepreneurs say that, they scale and go into this whole chasing speed because they have investors, they have to raise another round. How difficult is it to straddle sort of the investor hat and make those companies sort of stay stable but still chase growth? I think it's really tough, right? That call, especially as an early stage investor.
Yeah, very, very good question. Before you start to scale, first of all, like Nishant said, you need to be ready to scale. 76% of the companies have failed because they scaled too early. Yeah. So too early is bad, too late is also bad. I am on the board of a company called Velocity Global from US, which in 4 years or so has reached $100 million revenue from 0 to 100 million. And now we are going for next 3.5, 4 years, we will take it to $1 billion. What are we doing there that sort of makes this journey as predictable as possible, right? So 4 or 5 things, and I'll answer your question as well. Like Nishant said, make sure your product is ready for scale. Don't do that too early, right? The other point I'll highlight is for all product companies, startups, is that make sure your innovation scales with your company. 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, will your product innovation quotient will remain competitive and high? Very important point. I can answer more questions on that later, right? But 3, streamline your processes. 4, make sure your resources are aligned. And this is where Samidha's question comes in. What are the resources? Well, resources are your team is ready for scale, your marketing, etc. is ready for scale. But one very important resource is money. So do you have enough money to scale? I see a lot of Indian companies that are ready to go and launch the product in US, but they don't have money. The amount of money it takes to create a team in US is several $1 million to begin with, and they don't have that. So it is very important for you to make sure you have enough resources, you have some powder dry before you start scaling globally. Extremely important point. The one point also I will tell, which most people do not pay attention to in scaling, is make sure your culture, the culture in the company that you have created remains intact. And it is easier said than done. When you cross 30 or 40 people, your culture that you have created like a parent falls apart. So you have to do, if you ask John Chambers, if you read his book, Connecting the Dots, he will tell the most important job of a CEO is to keep the culture intact while you are scaling from $10 million to $50 billion. There's no magic. There's a lot of hard work and a lot of things you have to do to make sure the culture remains. So all of these have to be aligned. There is no one recipe, like both my fellows have said, but you need to have the basics there before you scale, and all resources have to be in line.
Nishant, you also had a point, but I'll just add one question to it. How difficult is it? And you've been on the enterprise SaaS side. I think it's easier for founders in those companies to kind of not be overly, inclined to raising big rounds because, the business models are different. What do you do when, say, I'm a founder in a very hyper growth sector where my direct competitor is raising tons of money? How do I sort of chase that kind of growth and scale if I'm number two? I mean, I can actually give examples. If you look at Oyo and the kind of money that it raised, it's very difficult for the second and the third, competitor and the peer to kind of come up to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. The point I was going to just add to Vivek's point was just bring to life what does it mean to hold on to your culture. And speaking about the counter examples to scale, I was saying, like, one of the things, say for example, both at LinkedIn and at Freshdesk that we did was for scaling culture, we went low tech. Weekly, bi-weekly, sort of, do an all hands, send out a newsletter, do small focus groups, meet with your people, like he said, hire the best talent. All counterintuitive to process and tech that a scale story will tell you. So I was just going to throw that example of to operationalize how would you do that. But to your question, Samidha, I think there's no one easy answer, right? And you have to realize that luck plays a role in the outcome, in the answer. You can put in your best effort, and that's what you should focus on, by the way. But there might be a case where your competitor just got a big round, and the arms race starts, and now I think it goes down to I would say, my character as an entrepreneur. What do I want to do? If I have conviction in my product and my people and saying, hey, look, I'm playing the long game, it's okay, let them go out and, I'm taking a bet. It could be that I would die, but I really have confidence because of XYZ variables that I don't need to enter the arms race. I mean, you sit it out. I mean, obviously, when that sector becomes hot, you will benefit to some extent with it. But if you go toe-to-toe in the arms race, I think, and you're not prepared for it, I think that's when you lose. And so, yes, there's examples like an Uber beating out sort of a lot of local competition, but there's also counter examples here in India, right? You saw what happened with housing.com. It was going crazy, marketing, all that stuff, but now they're not there. Like the guys who have stuck it out, at that time, some of their competitors did not actually, spend crazily on marketing and so on, and they're the ones who've now acquired, right? So I think it comes down to your conviction. There are moments in time when you have to just, say, okay, my gut is saying I got to take this. And there might be times when you have to, get short-term into the arms race to get to a place of sanity. Because if you realize that if you don't catch the bus, you're dead. So I think it has,
why I asked that question is because I talked to a lot of founders who actually were building very sanely, not raising, crazy capital, focusing on unit economics and the basics of doing business. But they've sort of run into a competitor who's gone and raised billions. What do you do? And actually, these businesses could have been sound businesses over a period of time. I feel at times we just have too much stress on scaling and 10x engineer and whatever.
That's what I'm saying, right? There are moments in time when that is the right thing. That's the trend. and you have to catch that trend before it kind of fizzles off and the next trend comes. In that sense, makes sense to follow. But then there's enough counter examples. Probably people don't focus enough on them. Good friend of mine, Bhanu, is here tomorrow at NASSCOM. He's built great gain over the last 10 plus years, profitable business, lifestyle business, and now he's the acquirer. He's going off to all these guys who have flamed out. So I think it depends on your market. But if you look at hospitality and travel, it's a long-term market. Things take time. It'll play out. It's okay. Even if you miss one bus, the next bus is coming. But there might be like a small, short technology where if you don't catch that bus, it's finished. That technology is over.
Samidha, can I comment? Very counterintuitive. For the product and technology startup, actually, I love when a startup follows a big player. It does not discourage me. Actually, it encourages me, because any very large and successful company leaves enough breadcrumbs which are good for a startup to actually build a base and then take it from there. I have built several startups. I can give specific examples. For example, a company that I fund, Vulcan Software, is head-on with ServiceNow and Zendesk. It competes head-on. It's not Freshdesk because that is mid-segment. This is enterprise. And we are winning customers. We are replacing ServiceNow. We are replacing Salesforce. And we are slowly building and we haven't even raised money. So all product people, focus on technology. Your fuel is technology and innovation, not money. Money will come if you can convince the right people that you have something that is unique and aspirational for your customers to have.
I was just going to add on from a kind of US lens, and we have seen the venture landscape kind of change over the last, I would say, 3 decades. There's a ton of cash available. I mean, I know it may not seem as much as from a founder lens, and I totally empathize and get it because I work with early stage founders day in, day out. But I would echo my folks here, just stay patient. End of the day, there's going to be competition. Competition is a good thing to have. Absolutely, yes, if they've raised 100 million, you're at 1 million, there's a lot to catch up. But I would just say stay the course. Stay the course, keep your heads down, build your team strong, be passionate about what you're building, and kind of commit to your growth, right? And be focused on your growth and kind of be the best at it. End of the day, that kind of takes leverage over, whether be it's a partnership with that company that you're going to go over, or there's going to be some sort of a synergy that's going to form. And we've seen that over and over again. One example from US standpoint would be Thumbtack. I mean, I think you guys should read that story. I mean, it is a client of ours, proud SVB client, but we've seen that story from zero to where it is today. So I think that's a classic story, and they've done a great write-up about it, the founder. And it's very honest and very relatable to a lot of early stage companies going through what it's going through and what it could become to what Thumbtack has become today.
There's a subtle point in what you just said, Priya. I just want to make sure everyone got that. There's a piece of saying, if someone else has raised 100 million, you're a million. Yeah. I think obviously that's a reality check to say, should I stay in this business? If I should stay in this business. But I think that's when you said you focus on your growth. I think my observation is a lot of people who are building lifestyle businesses, profitable, easy, that's a very good business model to have, by the way, right? You make actually a ton more money, have much better lifestyle. But that does not get you to these kind of companies which are global beating. You have to want to grow. So growth is important, not growth at all costs. And so I just want to kind of draw that distinction is the guys who are going to really break out are the dream biggers, the guys who dream big. That's non-negotiable. It's how you actually fulfill that in a more sustainable manner. That's what we're debating, but I think it was subtle in your point.
So what really is the competitive advantage, when you're going out chasing growth, speed and scale, aside of, all the funds that you've raised? What really sort of stands out? Nishant?
What stands out in what sense?
What's your competitive advantage as a startup?
For me, my fund, you mean? Or?
No, I'm saying generally. What do you think?
As a startup. Yeah. I think the competitive advantage is different for different startups. I think you have to know what that competitive advantage is. I would say Freshdesk is an example where they've built multiple, but their competitive advantage was Girish. Girish is an amazing product mind, right? And so he's able to design multiple products. Now, of course, we've also perfected the art of, of sales, right? And inside sales at that. So, he's developed multiple competitive advantages, but generally it goes down to the founder sort of DNA. The founder typically is either a product guy or a sales guy, and normally you partner with the opposite. But normally your competitive advantage gets designed based on that. Steve Jobs was a product person, and Apple was a product company, great product, so it just sold. But there's plenty of other most enterprise software examples are examples where sales and marketing is your DNA, and that's your core advantage, and product kind of sucks, but still, the sales machine is so good that it gets there. So I think you have to be able to identify that and exploit it.
I think we were discussing this before. One of the things I would say is, there's a ton of articles on localized paradox. So if a company, as an example, if it's an Indian company solving an India problem, and you've set your infrastructure team and kind of your customer very India-centric, and then one day you look up and you want a global and scale, it's going to be much harder. So I think the critical kind of a difference should be from the start, whether be it you're solving an India problem or a global problem, you should have a global mindset. And what does that mindset mean? It's just having that kind of a long-term vision on that's what you want to go. And this is your step 1, step 2, step 3 approach versus figuring out at that end of step 1 what you want to do. So I think that I feel would be a unique advantage.
Yeah, let me add to what Nishant and Priya said, is competitive advantage. Again, these are mostly product and technology people. I think it has to come from technology itself. It is very, very important, like Priya said, that if you are building a B2B enterprise company, the India market is not large enough. You cannot build more than 10, 20, $30 million company here. So you have to go global at some point, which means your product has to be global from day one, and that is not easy. Very important. With that comes, a lot of people have asked me this question because I have 6 patents and all that. Some people were talking to me outside. When should a startup file for patent? And my answer to that is as early as possible. The key though is that patent has to be in the core of your technology. So I advised some startups today that just like shooting bull you have, there's a main bull and then around a circle and around a circle. For a startup, the patents have to be in the bull. No other extracurricular activity. Number of patents do not increase your value, but if you have patent in that core, that is very, very valuable from multiple perspectives, and that will give you competitive advantage better than anything else for a long period of time if you truly own something valuable there.
Although Vivek, I think again, for product companies, that's very true. And for deep tech, very, very true, because you want to protect what you have. But there's enough other industries where it is really me too, and you're providing a better support, you're providing other things. Don't get caught up in an IP kind of, let's go file a 7-year IP.
Business model.
It depends. So I think the competitive advantage, which you are good at, you're good at, other people tell you you're good at, that's your competitive advantage. Design a business around it.
So just quick last few thoughts. If you had to kind of sum up what really are the challenges when you're gunning for, breakneck scale, speed, etc., what do you sort of keep in mind as a startup entrepreneur or a team which is chasing this kind of growth? How different is it globally and in India, Priya, for that matter?
I mean, a lot of the points have been said here before, but one thing I think for me it stands out over and over again when we talk about scale, which is successful, not successful. Scale when the time is right. Scale for the right product. Scale for the right business. Don't scale for the sake of. Because I think a lot of founders do for the sake of. I think that would be, for me, one thing I would take away from.
Nishant, anything in particular to keep in mind?
I mean, I think...
Or any other big
I used
India
to say
challenge?
this to my LinkedIn team. I said to the Fresh Test team as well. If you're building a 100-story building, you're going to, you are on ground 1, floor 2, floor 3. The formula is going to change. When you're in scale mode, you're changing pretty much every year. The fundamental of the company actually changes. The business model might change, the people might change. And so you have to just keep up with that. So I think, the change is obviously the only constant. I think to navigate that successfully, what that means as an entrepreneur, as a board, is you have to keep asking yourself, what am I not doing that I should be doing? And what am I doing that I should not be doing, right? So the negative is where you should focus to say, let's stop these business lines that are not working. Or, what is it going to take to get 50%, 100% growth, and actually work through those and debate it out, because only then you'll actually find out those formulas. Because things could be going really well, right? And you're scaling 50%, 100%, 200% a year, but you could be scaling 600% or 1000%, right? If you have the right kind of this thing. So you have to keep asking yourself those questions. Typically what challenges, like you said, I think it always eventually somewhere down the road comes down to team and culture. You didn't hire the right team at the right time. You didn't get rid of the wrong people at the right time, even if they're the best people. If they're ruining a culture, I think you need to let them go. Eventually, because those people make decisions, it comes down to that for me.
So I also want to check, in terms of scale for privately held companies and the way they are rewarded with a valuation gain. How does it sort of reflect in the public markets? Because actually in the US, all the IPOs this year have really underperformed, right? And one obviously is down to 8 billion from 47 billion. So how is scaling sort of rewarded in private markets, which is a lot to do with valuation, but how different are the metrics when you go to the public market?
I can just talk from a macro standpoint. Yes, obviously, with the larger funds coming into play in these days, a lot more companies end to stay more private, lot longer before they go IPO. I would think it's a benefit for the company, because that gives them not only the dollar to continue to be profitable and build their unit economics to go for a successful IPO, and take their time. Because without that, think about it, if that doesn't exist, then they're rushed to make the ends meet, right? So either they fall off, or they try to scale too fast and fall off, and or they don't make it even that far. So I think this is, again, end of the day, as long as they follow all the things that kind of their gut feels in terms of the product market fit and business model, I think staying private is only going to give them the benefit in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just a rush. It's not like the public markets just put, you on a accelerated schedule, because obviously you have to get your roadshow right, you have to get your pitch right. I think it's just very different. Like a public company and a private company are two very, very different beasts, right? The public companies bring a lot of scrutiny, bring a lot of process. So if you're an innovative company, actually that can be very hampering, right? In some sense. The fact that you have a lot of private market money out there available makes it much possible to stay private longer. Like Uber went to 65 plus $1 billion of valuation, or 80 probably. So that has changed the dynamic from maybe a few years ago or a few decades ago. But I think it's just two different models of the company, and naturally at some point as a founder, as a CXO even, you have to know when to get off, right? That's the public guys are a whole set of different guys who are used to that world and have grown up in that world. But normally you see that point happen sort of when you're getting into about 60% growth, 60-70% year-over-year growth sustainably. If you can't do the 100-200%, that's when you start getting into public market, because public market expects that kind of growth, versus a private market is expecting you to double sort of year-over-year, right? So roughly that's the timing, and you have to kind of make sure you get it right. So I think that's how I would think about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of investors are now actually recalibrating in terms of how they look at companies and in their portfolio, and what should be their timeline to go public. And I think that if that comes in, how does that impact your scale and growth plans? I think that's also something which is becoming relevant, right? Especially with the examples that we've seen.
The other part to this, I was talking about growth rate, but also roughly about 120 million in revenue. That's when you start thinking IPO. You're getting, obviously you start that IPO journey about 1.5 years, 2 years before, but you know that you're getting into that space. So if you wanted to, you could go IPO. There have been IPOs with companies at 60, 70 million, but normally the 100, 150 is the magic number, coupled with this growth rate.
That you're only talking about enterprise and SaaS companies, right? Or are you talking also about consumer internet?
Consumer internet would be, different. The GMV multiples are a multiple of revenue normally, right? So,
So any last thoughts before we open it up for questions from the audience? Vivek?
So we are repeating ourselves, but number one, make sure you are ready to scale, and this is the right time to scale. Number two, you are prepared to scale, which means all the resources are lined up, whether it is money or team or your marketing or your IT, whatever it takes. And number three, and I'll continue to emphasize that, make sure your innovation quotient remains high for next 5 to 10 years, not just 2 to 3 years. Without that, you will actually fall apart at some point.
Audience questions? Oh, we are? I'm really sorry then.
We are available. If you have
Thanks so
any
much.
specific
Yeah.
questions, we can answer it for
All
you.
the panelists are available. I'm thankful for all your insights. Hope you had a
Thank you. That was a great session. Thank you so much.